Cassia Preston hadn't even stepped out of the taxi when a soccer ball slammed into her suitcase and knocked it over, sending her jeans and t-shirts spilling across the cobblestone driveway. "Welcome to London," she muttered, blowing a loose strand of hair from her face as she bent to gather her things. "I'm so sorry," a little boy called out, racing over with wide eyes and a crooked front tooth. "I didn't mean to, Kai," a voice barked from the gate next door. Deep, commanding American. "What did I tell you about kicking the ball toward the driveway?" Cassia looked up to see a man walking toward them, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark cashmere sweater and slacks that looked like they cost more than her entire suitcase. He had short, dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of stormy skies. "It was an accident," the boy said, shrinking behind Cassia. "It's all right," she said quickly, giving him a soft smile before turning to the man. "No harm done, I'm Cassia. Visiting my cousin for the summer." The man's gaze lingered on her for a second longer than necessary. "Julian Raines," he said simply, extending a hand. "This is my son, Kai." She shook his hand, firm grip, warm palm. He looked at her like he was trying to figure her out. Kai tugged on Julian's sleeve. "She's staying next door." Julian's eyes flicked to the house beside his. "I guess she is." Cassia didn't know it then, but that handshake would change everything. Her cousin Mia's townhouse was charming and sun-drenched, tucked in a quiet upscale neighborhood in Kensington. Cassia had needed the break. After a brutal breakup and quitting her chaotic marketing job in Chicago, she was desperate for a reset. Mia offered her guest room for the summer, and Cassia jumped on the first flight out. She hadn't expected her cousin to live next to someone like Julian. He didn't look like the kind of man who lived in a quiet neighborhood with a 7-year-old. Every time she saw him stepping out of a sleek black sports car, wearing tailored suits, or giving quiet orders to staff, he looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not a backyard. And yet, every morning, she saw him walking Kai to the gate with a backpack slung over one shoulder. Every evening, he returned like clockwork, sometimes with a bag of takeout, sometimes in a chauffeured car, always with that unreadable expression. "You've met Julian?" Mia asked one night over tea. Cassia nodded. "He's intense." "He's loaded," Mia said bluntly. "Tech millionaire. Sold a startup for something like 80 million 2 years ago. Keeps quiet, though. Rumors say he took full custody of Kai after his ex disappeared. No one really knows the full story." Cassia stared out the window. Julian was in the driveway, talking to a man in a suit. He looked up as if he could feel her watching. Their eyes met, her breath caught. "He's not my type," Cassia said quickly. Mia laughed. "You said that like you were trying to convince yourself." The next morning, Cassia was walking back from the corner bakery with a paper bag of croissants when she heard Kai's voice. "Cassia, wait!" She turned to see him running toward her, his backpack bouncing. "Dad's not home yet and I forgot my key. Can I wait with you?" She hesitated. "Does your dad know where you are?" "I left him a note," Kai said, already stepping inside the gate with her. They sat on the front steps, splitting a chocolate croissant. "You like it here?" she asked. Kai shrugged. "It's okay. Dad works a lot, but he says I'm his whole world." Her heart tugged. "He seems like a good dad." "He is," Kai said proudly. "He just doesn't smile much." Footsteps crunched on the gravel. Julian was home. He looked from Kai to Cassia, then down at the crumbs. "I see you made yourself at home." Kai grinned. "Cassia saved me from starvation." Julian's eyes softened for a second before he looked at her. "Thank you." "I should have been back 10 minutes ago, but traffic was—" "It's fine," Cassia said, standing. "He was good company." Julian nodded. "Still, I owe you one." She didn't expect him to show up the next day with a small bouquet of white tulips. "For saving my son from a tragic chocolate croissant famine," he said, handing them over without a smile, but there was something in his eyes, something warm. From that day on, everything shifted. It started with small things. Julian appeared at the bakery one morning and insisted on paying for her coffee. He invited her and Mia to a private garden party he hosted for Kai's school. They ran into each other at the bookstore, and she caught him staring at her from behind a biography he definitely wasn't reading. One night, Mia was stuck at work and Cassia was alone. She heard a knock at the door. Julian stood there holding 2 containers of takeout and a bottle of wine. "I heard your cousin's working late," he said. "Thought you might want company." They ate on the rooftop terrace. Talked about everything Chicago, London, raising a child, losing people. He didn't talk much about Kai's mother, but she didn't push. When the night air got chilly, he offered her his jacket. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "Neither are you," she replied. He looked at her for a long moment, then his phone buzzed. He checked it and stood. "I should go, but I'd like to see you again." "I live next door," she said lightly. He smiled. "That's the best part." 1 week later, he took her to dinner, a real one, not takeout. She expected a nice restaurant. Instead, he picked her up in a sleek black Bentley and drove her to a rooftop garden overlooking the Thames. There was a private table set with candles and champagne. A string quartet played softly in the background. She blinked. "This is extravagant," he looked at her. "You saved my son with a croissant. The least I can do is feed you steak with a view," she laughed. "Are you always like this?" "Only when I'm trying to impress someone." By dessert, she was leaning into him, laughing at something he said. By the end of the night, when he brushed her hair back and kissed her under the stars, she wasn't thinking about Chicago or heartbreak or anything else. She was thinking about the way his lips felt on hers, how his hands cradled her face like she was something delicate. When he pulled back, he whispered, "I haven't felt like this in a long time." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just kissed him again, and that was the beginning. Cassia stood in front of the bathroom mirror, still gripping the velvet box Julian had left in her hand at the end of their dinner the night before. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, etched with a single word on the inside. "Begin." She hadn't known what to say then. She still didn't. It was too thoughtful, too personal, too soon, and yet it didn't feel wrong. What unnerved her was how right it felt. Downstairs, Mia was finishing a call as Cassia padded into the kitchen barefoot. "You're glowing," Mia said, raising an eyebrow. "Don't deny it." "I've never seen you like this." Cassia set the box on the table. "What's that?" "Julian gave it to me last night after a rooftop dinner with a quartet." Mia leaned in. "Do you realize how rare that is? He doesn't date. He attends fundraisers with women who wear diamonds like perfume, but he never does this." Cassia sat down, rubbing her temples. "Maybe I'm just a distraction, a summer thing. I mean, he's loaded, gorgeous, and clearly taken with you," Mia finished. "Don't overthink it. Just feel it." Cassia wasn't sure she could. She'd spent the last year building walls. Julian Raines knocked them down with a look. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the courtyard with a book, needing quiet. But the moment she stepped outside, Kai darted over from next door, clutching a half-built Lego spaceship. "Cassia, can you help me? Dad's on a call and I can't figure out the wings." She followed him to Julian's patio. The table was littered with tiny parts and instruction sheets. She crouched beside him, carefully attaching a piece. "You're good at this," Kai said with admiration. "I had a lot of practice growing up. My brother used to make entire cities out of Legos. I was his assistant," he grinned. "You want to be my assistant?" "I think I already am." Julian's voice drifted from inside the house. Cassia looked up just as the glass door opened. He was barefoot, sleeves rolled to the forearms, phone still against his ear. He didn't speak, but when he saw her there kneeling beside his son, laughing, his expression changed. It wasn't approval, it was something deeper, warmer. Cassia's heart gave a warning thud. Later, as she rose to leave, Julian followed her to the gate. "I didn't plan to like you," he said quietly. She turned, her hand on the latch. "Well, that's flattering, I mean it. I plan to keep my life simple, work, raise Kai, keep the rest locked out." "Then why let me in?" His eyes didn't waver. "Because you didn't knock, you just walked in." Cassia swallowed the 1,000 questions that rose inside her and nodded once before walking away. She didn't see the way he watched her go. The next evening, Julian invited them both to a charity gala he was co-chairing. Mia had a shift, so Cassia went with him and Kai. The driver picked them up in a silver Rolls-Royce. Kai, dressed in a tiny tux, sat proudly between them, swinging his feet. "You clean up nice," Julian murmured, eyes sweeping over her navy satin gown. "You don't look half bad yourself," she replied, adjusting the pin on Kai's lapel. The event was held in a glass atrium blooming with orchids and chandeliers. Cassia had never seen anything like it. Waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Julian greeted donors with polite nods, but he never strayed far from her side. As the evening wore on, she noticed the glances. Women in designer gowns sizing her up, whispers as they passed. "Who is she with Julian? Never seen her before." "She's not even British." Cassia stiffened. Julian leaned close. "Ignore them. I didn't realize I'd be on display." "You're not. They're just not used to me bringing anyone real." "Is that what I am? Real?" He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw uncertainty flicker in his. "I don't know what this is yet, but it's not fake." "That much I know." Before she could answer, a woman with flawless cheekbones and an accent that could slice glass approached. She greeted Julian with a kiss on both cheeks, then turned to Cassia. "And you must be the friend from next door," she said, smiling like a wolf. "Cassia," Julian said, his tone tightening. "This is Elise. She handles the European accounts." "Among other things," Elise replied, her eyes never leaving Cassia. "Julian and I go way back." Cassia forced a polite smile. "Nice to meet you." Elise turned back to Julian. "We need to talk about the Zurich meeting, alone." "I'll be with Kai and Cassia," he said smoothly. "Send me the brief." Elise's smile faltered. As she walked away, Cassia muttered, "That was subtle." Julian didn't respond. He just reached for her hand under the table and laced their fingers together. By the time they returned home, Kai was asleep in the car. Julian carried him inside while Cassia waited outside the townhouse. When he returned, he didn't go back in. He leaned against the gatepost, watching her. "I'm not used to this," he said after a long pause, "letting someone see past the surface." Cassia stepped closer. "You think I'm not scared too? I've been burned, Julian. I came here to hide, not fall into this." His hand brushed her cheek. "Then maybe we're both exactly where we need to be. I don't want to be a temporary distraction." "You're not." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She leaned in, and instead of kissing her, he pulled her against him and held her there, her cheek pressed against his chest. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe she might be safe. Inside the house, behind the tall windows, a light flicked on in the upstairs hallway. Elise stood in the shadows, her eyes locked on the man who had once needed her, watching him hold another woman like she no longer existed. Cassia didn't see her. But Julian did. The first sign that something had shifted came the following morning. Cassia was sitting at the cafe near the corner, sketching in her notebook with a cup of black tea growing cold beside her. She hadn't planned on drawing anything, but her hand moved anyway, lines curving into a rooftop garden, the outline of a man's shoulders turned toward the Thames. A shadow fell across the page before she heard the voice. "You always draw people who don't know they're being watched." She looked up and saw Julian, dressed in a charcoal wool coat, his tie loosened, a paper bag in one hand. There was a different air around him today, not cold, but cautious. "I wasn't watching," she said, flipping the page. "I was remembering." He sat down across from her without asking and placed the bag on the table. "You skipped breakfast." "You were watching me, maybe." She gave him a look, but he didn't flinch. "I was up late," she admitted. "Couldn't sleep." "Why not?" She traced the edge of her cup. "Something about last night. I felt like I was being evaluated." "You were." Her head snapped up. "Not by me," he added. "By them. That crowd doesn't know what to do with someone they can't label." She stared at him. "Do you care?" "I used to. And now, I care more about what you think when they look at you like that." Cassia leaned back. "I don't belong in that world, Julian." He didn't blink. "Neither do I." She shook her head. "You were raised in it." "No," he said, voice low. "I built it." "Out of necessity. That's different." She tilted her head. "Then what did you leave behind to build it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled something from the paper bag and handed it to her, a small pastry with a lavender glaze. "Try that." It's from a place I used to go before things got complicated. She took a bite and closed her eyes. Okay, I forgive you for avoiding the question. He stood and pushed his chair in. I'll answer it when I know you won't leave after hearing it. That night, she stood at her window, staring at the house next door. The lights were off downstairs, but a soft glow came from a room on the second floor. She could just make out the shadow of Julian moving past the window, then stopping. He was looking out, too. The next morning, she found a note slipped into her sketchbook. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Dinner, tomorrow. Bring your questions. She didn't wait for the next night to bring them. The following afternoon, she knocked on his door. When no one answered after a moment, she hesitated. But then the door opened and Julian stood there, his sleeves rolled again, a faint scratch on his cheek. Kai's upstairs with Greta, he said, stepping aside. He fell off his scooter. No stitches. Cassia entered and followed him through the house. It was the first time she'd seen the inside beyond the foyer. Everything was clean lines and soft textures, stone, glass, deep woods, but nothing cold. The warmth surprised her. Greta, she asked, his nanny. She's part of the family now, came on when he was 3, Cassia nodded slowly. He didn't mention her. She keeps things running when I can't, Julian said, but he doesn't talk about her much, he clings to Constance, I'm one. You're becoming another. He led her into a room with tall windows and bookshelves that lined the walls. In the center was a table set for 2. I thought this was for tomorrow. I changed my mind. She stared at the place settings. You cook? I do when I'm trying to distract someone from asking about my past. She raised an eyebrow. Not happening. Dinner was quiet at first, grilled sea bass, roasted vegetables, a citrus tart she suspected wasn't made by him, but he poured the wine himself. By the time their plates were cleared, she was leaning forward, elbows on the table. What happened to Kai's mom? Julian didn't move. She left. No warning, no fight, no note, just gone. 3 years ago, Cassia exhaled. I'm sorry. He was 4, Julian said. He still asks why sometimes. I don't have an answer. She reached across the table. You don't have to carry all of it alone. I didn't plan to let anyone in again, Cassia. His voice was quiet. Then you showed up with your suitcase and your sarcasm and your absolute refusal to pretend. She blinked. And that ruined your plan. It destroyed it. She got up and walked around the table, then stood in front of him. He looked up but didn't move. Then let me be part of the new one. His hand came up slowly, fingers brushing her waist. Are you sure? She bent and kissed him. This time it wasn't soft or hesitant. It was deliberate, certain. When she pulled back, he whispered, I don't know how to do this halfway. Then don't. They didn't speak for a long time after that. She curled up against him on the sofa, his hand tracing patterns on her shoulder, the fire casting shadows across the floor. Eventually, he said, There's a trip I have to take next week. Zurich, just 48 hours. She looked up. And Kai, Greta will stay here, but I was wondering. He paused. Come with me, she blinked. To Zurich. I have a meeting, but the rest of the time is mine. I want you there. Cassia sat up. I don't have anything to wear. I know a tailor, she laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. Julian, I'm not someone who fits into that kind of life. He stood and offered his hand. Then I'll make it fit around you. She stared at him for a long moment, then took it. Neither of them saw the envelope that had been slid under the front door. Neither of them knew it contained a photograph of Cassia and Julian on the rooftop, circled in red ink, and a single word written in block letters beneath it. Mine. Cassia stepped off the private jet and into a crisp Zurich morning, the wind curling through her coat as the city stretched wide and bright beneath a pale blue sky. Julian walked beside her, his hand resting lightly at her lower back, guiding her toward the waiting car. The driver opened the door with a nod, and Cassia slid into the buttery leather interior, still trying to wrap her head around the last 24 hours. She hadn't expected to say yes. But when Julian asked, it hadn't felt like a question. It had felt like an invitation to something that had already begun the moment she arrived in London. Is it always like that? She asked as the car pulled away from the runway. He glanced at her. Like what? landing somewhere and having someone waiting with your name on a sign. Getting into a car like this, no lines, no baggage claim. I've worked a long time to make things quiet where they used to be loud, he said. She studied him. What did it used to sound like? Julian didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the armrest, pulled out a slim folder and handed it to her. Those are the project files for the meeting. I want you to see them. Why? Because I'm not just bringing you here to keep you close. I trust your instincts. You see through noise. Cassia opened the folder. Diagrams, budgets, timelines. A proposed tech hub for underfunded youth programs across Europe. She looked up. This is more than a business deal, Julian nodded. It's the only thing I've built that feels like it's worth the sweat. And Elise, she's on the board. She'll be there. Cassia closed the folder. Then let's get this right. They arrived at the hotel just after noon. Their suite overlooked the Limmat River, and Cassia stood by the window, taking in the view as Julian made a call in the other room. She thought she was alone until she heard the door click shut behind her. Elise, she said without turning. Beautiful view, Elise replied, stepping closer. Even better company. Cassia turned slowly. Did you let yourself in? I have a key, Elise said, holding it up between two fingers. Julian and I shared a few things, including security access. Not anymore, Elise smiled. You really believe that? Cassia folded her arms. If you're here to scare me, it won't work. I'm not here for you, Elise said coolly. I'm here because Julian is making a mistake. And I don't enjoy cleaning up after him. Cassia stepped forward. You think I'm a mess. I think you're temporary, and I think you're in over your head. Julian's voice cut through the tension as he stepped into the room. You'll return that key before you leave. Elise turned. We need to talk about the Zurich vote, privately. We'll talk tomorrow in the meeting room with the rest of the board. Her jaw tensed. You're letting her be your filter now. I'm letting her be exactly what she is, someone I trust. More than you. Cassia didn't speak as Elise swept past her and slammed the door on her way out. Julian exhaled and turned to her. I didn't know she still had access. I'm not worried about her, Cassia said. I'm worried about what she'll try to do tomorrow. She doesn't control the vote, but she can sway it. Julian stepped closer. Then sway it first. The next morning came in a rush of espresso, tailored suits, and a sleek conference room perched at the top of a glass-paneled tower. Julian stood at the head of the table, presenting the hub proposal with Cassia seated beside him, flipping through each slide like she'd spent her life doing this. Elise sat at the far end, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When it came time for open discussion, Cassia leaned forward. This project doesn't just expand your brand reach, it restores something your competitors have lost: credibility. People want to believe in companies again. This is how you do that. One of the board members, a silver-haired man with a sharp accent, nodded. She speaks well. She speaks truth, Julian added. The vote was unanimous. Afterward, Julian took her hand under the table and squeezed it once. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. That evening, he took her to a quiet restaurant on a cliffside outside the city. There was no quartet, no candles, just the two of them and a sky that turned gold as the sun dipped behind the mountains. I've never brought anyone here, he said, watching her across the table. I believe you. He hesitated. Cassia, after Kai's mother left, I told myself I'd never have to explain anything again. I built walls so high I forgot what it felt like to be seen. She reached for his hand. You don't have to explain anything. Just be here. He looked at her, and for once the silence between them wasn't hiding anything. I love you, he said quietly. Cassia's breath caught, not because she was surprised, but because she had been waiting. Julian, she said slowly, I didn't come here looking for any of this. But I'm not leaving it behind. He stood and walked around the table, pulling her up gently. The wind caught her hair as he cradled her face with both hands. I want you with me, not just for Zurich, not just for now, she laughed, eyes stinging. Are you proposing? Not yet, he said. But I'm dangerously close. They kissed as the sun sank behind them. The next morning, back in London, Cassia opened the door to find a courier holding a small navy box. Inside was a single silver key, attached to a tag that read, "For when you're ready to stop pretending you're just visiting." Behind her, Julian stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while Kai danced around in mismatched socks. Cassia stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I'm staying," she said, sliding the key into her pocket. Julian turned, eyes warm. "Then welcome home." Julian hadn't planned on proposing that day. But when Cassia stepped into the drawing room wearing Kai's handmade paper crown and carrying 2 mugs of tea, one with a ridiculous cartoon cat on it, he knew there wasn't going to be a better moment in his life. Kai, seated cross-legged on the rug with a stack of flashcards, looked up and declared, "Dad, she beats you at Uno and she knows how to make pancakes without the smoke alarm going off. I think you should marry her." Cassia nearly dropped the mugs. Julian leaned back in the armchair, watching her cheeks flush. She looked at him, wide-eyed, and he realized she thought he might laugh it away. He didn't. "Give me a minute," he said, rising. He left the room for less than 30 seconds. When he returned, he was holding a small black box. Kai gasped so loudly he fell backward. Cassia backed up a step. "Julian, wait, don't say no yet. I'm not asking because it's convenient. I'm asking because I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box. A ring sat inside, not flashy or oversized, just timeless, elegant, and completely her. "You didn't even check my size," she whispered. "I had help," Julian said, glancing toward the staircase. "Mia told me, weeks ago." Cassia laughed, soft and breathless. "You thought about this weeks ago?" "I thought about this the moment you walked into my life, like you'd always belonged there." He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He just held out the box and said, "I want you, Cassia, for dinners and bedhead mornings and everything in between. I want you with Kai. I want you in this life, not watching it from the guest room. Will you marry me?" She stared at him for a long second, then another. Then, without a word, she walked forward, curled her hand around his wrist, and nodded. "Yes." Kai exploded into a cheer loud enough to wake the neighbors. They didn't plan a long engagement. Cassia didn't want to wait. Neither did Julian. And Kai, who insisted on being the ring security, started counting the days on a whiteboard in the kitchen. The ceremony was held in a walled garden tucked behind a centuries-old estate in the Cotswolds. Only a handful of people were invited. Mia officiated. The vows were whispered beneath a canopy of wild roses, and Kai stood proudly between them as Julian slid the ring on her finger. Cassia didn't cry until Julian leaned in and whispered something only she could hear. "You took my life apart and made it make sense again." Afterward, the 3 of them danced barefoot on the lawn beneath strings of golden lights. Julian held her against his chest, his hands resting just above her waist, and kissed the top of her head. "You're sure this isn't all too fast?" she murmured. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is not finding you sooner." They returned to London as a family. Cassia moved into Julian's house officially, though she made him promise to keep her favorite mug and let her repaint the library. Kai got his own wall of shelves for his Lego masterpieces. Greta retired from full-time hours but still came by every Friday evening to help with Kai's newest creations. Elise resigned from the board 2 weeks after the Zurich vote. No confrontation, no letter, just silence. Julian didn't mention her again, and Cassia never asked. Julian's tech hub launched in 4 cities before the end of the year. Cassia took over the creative direction for the initiative's public campaigns, and within months, she'd built a full team of her own. She didn't hide behind the scenes anymore. She didn't need to. One rainy afternoon, months after the wedding, Julian found her curled on the sofa with a sketch pad. "Still drawing me when I'm not looking?" he asked. She turned the pad around. He wasn't in it. Kai was. He was sitting at the kitchen table, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth as he painted something with intense focus. Julian came closer. "He's happy," he said. "He's safe," she replied. Julian knelt beside her, resting his head against her shoulder, and they watched the rain slide down the windows in quiet contentment. That week, they flew to Italy on a whim. Kai had been learning about ancient Rome in school, and Julian decided he needed to see it firsthand. They stayed in a villa overlooking the sea, and on one of the evenings, as the sun dipped low, Julian led Cassia out to the terrace. A small table waited there, set for two. No staff. No string quartet, just wine, fresh bread, and silence. She looked at him. "What's this?" He smiled, slow and certain. "The beginning of everything." They sat, fingers intertwined, the sound of the waves below them. Cassia leaned in. "You did it," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" "You built something that finally made you feel." Julian kissed her slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "No," he said against her mouth. "You did." They stayed out there long after the stars rose. And when they went inside, hands still twined, door closing softly behind them, there was no more pretending. They were home. Forever.